last battle at Yorktown had ended the 8 long years of struggle for American independence in October of 1781. But in Tom's River, the struggle between the Loyalists and the Patriots continued. Privateering was still active along the coast. At the peace table in Paris, Peace Commissioners Benjamin Franklin, John Jay, and John Adams had recently begun negotiations with their British counterparts. 8 long, bitter years after the shot heard round the world was fired at Lexington on April 19, 1775. Tom's River's fight for independence was taking place right in its own backyard, not on the battlefields of Trenton, Princeton, or Monmouth. There were no decisive battles here that produced a victory for the American cause, but a day-by-day battle did exist between the Loyalists and the Patriots. British-laden vessels that sailed up to New York along the coast provided Tom's River with opportunity to destroy both shipping and the morale of the British forces. On Wednesday, March 16, 1782, Tom's River became embroiled in an affair with Tory William Dillon when privateers captured his boat, the Lucy, as it sailed up from Little Egg Harbor laden with captured booty. The cargo was brought into Tom's River and auctioned off in the front porch of Abel Aiken's Tavern. The Pennsylvania Salt Works at Tom's River had not been the target of an attack since April 1st, 1778. At that time, many of the salt works had been destroyed, but the warehouses filled with salt were undamaged. The salt works at Tom's River were the largest along our country's shore, providing badly needed salt in the colonies for the preservation of food and the making of gunpowder. The meadows opposite Cranberry Inlet were a natural site for the salt works, but because of their importance, were vulnerable to British attack. The Tom's River Blockhouse was built during the latter part of 1776 or early 1777 to train and house militia that would protect the salt warehouses and defend the surrounding area. It was built on a hill and commanded the view of the salt warehouses as well as the village of Tom's River itself. The Tom's River Blockhouse fight was to become an important incident in the cause for independence for America. On December 19, 1781, the citizens of Monmouth County petitioned the legislature of Monmouth County to send Captain Joshua Huddy to command the Tom's River Blockhouse and the militia of 12 months' men, made up of 363 men from every part of Dover Township. About 25 served at the fort at a time. They left their farms and mills to give 1 month's service at the fort for the defense of the village. The village of Tom's River was strictly a privateer's town. Only patriots were allowed to live there. There had been a few Loyalist attacks on the village, but the patriots had successfully warded them off. On the morning of March 24th, 1782, all seemed quiet and normal in the village of Tom's River. On the previous day, 3 armed whaleboats filled with British soldiers under the command of Lieutenant Blanchard had slipped along the Jersey coast and through the Cranberry Inlet. Under the escort of the armed brig Arrogant, they had come down from New York to revenge the attack on William Dillon's boat on March 16th. Garrett Irons, on guard duty at the Pennsylvania Salt Works, saw the 3 ships sail through the Cranberry Inlet and immediately started the long 7-mile run into the village to alert Captain Huddy and the volunteer troops at the blockhouse. John Wilbur was on guard at the blockhouse when Irons arrived in the early morning. Upon being told of the ships that Irons had seen and the possible attack, Wilbur climbed the ladder to call for Captain Huddy. Captain Huddy and his men listened to the report, but found it difficult to believe. It seemed unlikely that such a large number of British and Loyalists would attack at this time. After all, the war had ended nearly 5 months earlier at Yorktown. Garrett Irons was rejected and sent walking back to his guard post. It was morning now, and Captain Huddy had ordered his volunteer troops out of the blockhouse for roll call. The men, true patriots, had not had any military training and looked ragged in their attempt to learn the discipline necessary to effectively defend the village and the fort. Sergeant Langdon called the roll. John Farr.
Present.
Jacob Stillwagon.
Aye.
Daniel Applegate.
Here.
Thomas Roysinder.
Aye.
John Wainwright.
Here.
Moses Robbins.
Here.
John Wilbur.
Here.
David Dodge.
Aye.
John Nivison.
Here.
John Mitchell.
Aye.
James Kinsley.
Here.
James Kennedy.
Aye.
Seth Story.
Present.
These militiamen seemed ill-prepared for any attack. Major John Cook of the 2nd Regiment of Monmouth Militiamen and a privateer, here chatting with his wife, had been out early this morning checking the lines of his boat. He did not seem to be aware of any approaching danger. During the Revolution, Tom's River was a busy, lively place for such a small village. The women of the village were always up and about their work early. Mrs. Daniel Applegate usually took her daughter for a stroll, looking for sticks and twigs to kindle the fire under the kettle that cooked the morning porridge. Mrs. Moses Robbins always fed her chickens and ducks first thing in the morning before going about her chores. The village well was where Mrs. John Nivison and Mrs. John Wilbur could frequently be found together in conversation, possibly exchanging a little gossip. Abel Akins and his wife would greet the villagers as they passed by the porch of their tavern. Tom's River was a friendly village where the Wainwrights and the Stillwagons and the Robbins and the Wilburs and the other early settlers, along with their children, were enjoying life, looking forward to the peaceful times of a new nation. Less than 8 miles away, the British were approaching the shore. There, waiting to greet and join them, were about 40 renegades and pine robbers led by Richard Davenport and William Dillon. Under the command of Lieutenant Blanchard, the British Loyalists and renegades marched overland to the north, coming down the Squan Road on their way to the Tom's River blockhouse and the village of peaceful patriots. Back at the fort, Captain Huddy and Sergeant Langdon had begun the daily march of volunteers around the blockhouse and through the village. As Garrett Irons had reported, the British were coming. The privateers, although they looked ragged, took their responsibility seriously. They also enjoyed the respect and attention of the villagers when they marched through the main street. A single but determined beat was all that was needed to keep the Loyalists and the renegades marching forward for the attack. The first sound of the oncoming British was heard in the village. Alarmed and aware of what was about to happen, the villagers gathered their families and fled. Alerted by the excitement in the village, Captain Huddy and the volunteers prepared for the attack. The blockhouse at Tom's River would soon become the focal point of a fierce fight. At Lieutenant Blanchard's order, the British commenced firing and began their orderly advance. Soon, soldiers from both sides were dropping, some wounded, some dying. Lieutenant Inslee of the British forces had been killed. Privateer Moses Robbins had been hit in the face. The British moved forward. John Wainwright was severely wounded, having been hit 6 times. Sergeant Langdon, who just a short time before had marched through the village, now was dead. Lieutenant Blanchard advanced and captured the men at the blockhouse as wounded and dying lay everywhere. The prize was the capture of Captain Joshua Huddy. The renegades, in a cruel act of vengeance, attacked Major Cook, who had taken no part in the battle, and bayoneted him to death. Lieutenant Blanchard and Dillon took Huddy along with the other captured patriots, wounded or not, and loaded them into the boats to be taken to the Sugar House prison in New York. Not content with the success of the attack, the Loyalists lit torches and set fire to the blockhouse. Determined to complete their destruction, the renegades helped the British set fire to the buildings in the abandoned village. History was happening in Toms River, and the events that were to follow would affect the peace efforts of men from three nations. At 10 o'clock on the morning of April 12, 1782, Captain Huddy, who had been taken from the prison in New York and put aboard a British ship, was brought to Gravelly Point on the Navesink, about a mile beyond the Highland Lighthouse. The British loyalists, contrary to the rules of war, decided to use Huddy as an example of their revenge for the executions carried out by the American patriots of British soldiers during the war. They were determined to hang man for man. His hands tied behind him, Huddy was reluctantly brought ashore, where a hastily built gallows awaited him. Loyalist Captain Lippincott and the others allowed Huddy to dictate his will. I, Joshua Huddy, being of sound mind and memory, do declare this my last will and testament. I commit my soul into the hands of Almighty God, hoping he may receive it in mercy, and next I commit my body to the earth. He left his good friend, Colonel Samuel Foreman, as his executor. A placard placed around Huddy's neck with the name Philip White on it was symbolic of the Loyalist revenge. "Up goes Huddy for Philip White," was shouted in almost jubilant unison. Captain Huddy's last words were, "I shall die innocent and in a good cause." Captain Lippincott, having trouble getting his men to pull the rope, took the rope himself, and very soon, poor Huddy was dead. News of this cruel act was immediately taken to General Washington. The new republic cried out for revenge, and the British were ordered to provide an officer of equal rank, Lieutenant Charles Askill, for hanging in reprisal for Huddy's murder. The peace efforts of three nations were stopped until it was determined that Askill's hanging would serve no useful purpose in the cause for freedom. 6 months after the fateful hanging, Benjamin Franklin, John Jay, and John Adams resumed peace negotiations in Paris. The Toms River blockhouse fight had indeed become an important incident in the fight for independence, and aided the infant republic in gaining valuable concessions during the Treaty of Peace, which ended the Revolutionary War.